Hi everybody, and welcome to CityLAB's second online matchmaker. Matchmakers are where we connect city staff with faculty members and instructors from Master Mohawk and Redeemer and help them start forging connections for projects that will begin in winter 2021. That's semester from January to April. So today we have with us Alissa Golden on the challenge that she submitted called Hamilton's History Today. We're really excited to learn more about that challenge from Alissa. And to sort of dig into the challenge a little bit deeper that she's put on the website. For those folks who are joining us, we can tell you to go check out our website, citylabhamilton.com/challenges. You can see all the different challenges, including Alissa's, and you can also indicate your interest and sort of apply for those challenges if you're a faculty member. And also a reminder for other City of Hamilton staff, as well as faculty members, that if you have an idea for a CityLAB challenge, something that you would like to put into your course, or something that you would like help with from students and faculty, you can feel free to submit your own challenge through our website as well. We're accepting challenges until November 16th, so the clock is ticking on that, but we're open to new ideas all the time. Great, so welcome Alissa, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. I feel like a real TV host now. So your challenge is really interesting one, and I think it really ties in to so many interesting questions around communities and histories and how we tell our story. As you said in your challenge, Hamilton is a city of communities in different areas. So I think it's really exciting and really interesting. Before we get into the project sort of details and the challenges you've laid it out, can you just tell us a little bit about what you do at the city? Your title is Heritage Project Specialist, is that right? What does a Heritage Project Specialist do?
That's a very good question. Well, it's a relatively new position. For quite a while, I was actually a heritage planner in our planning division, so responsible for ensuring that heritage resources are conserved across the city as a part of development applications, as changes are proposed. But this position that I'm in now, Heritage Project Specialist in our Tourism and Culture division, is actually looking at proactive sort of inventory and strategy work. So looking into the long term in terms of how we're actually identifying new heritage resources that are worth protecting across the city. So things like buildings, structures, landscapes like streetscapes, neighborhoods, settlement areas, as well as responsible for our archaeology management plan. And sort of what those long-term initiatives are to better facilitate conservation across the city. So one of the main things in my portfolio is what is called our Built Heritage Inventory Strategy. And that's a proactive initiative to essentially inventory across the entire city. So we do have existing resources that have been identified. We have 7 heritage conservation districts across the city. We have over 300 individually designated properties, think City Hall, Lister Block, Dundas Town Hall, sort of you can picture a lot of prominent buildings across the city. We also maintain a heritage register, which is of properties of interest, which is a way of at least flagging properties so that when we know development's happening, we can ensure that we're reviewing appropriate measures for how they might be conserved through that process. But across the rest of the city, we actually have quite a few historic buildings, pre-1950 or even sometimes older, that have no heritage status, have never been looked at. And the goal is to actually proactively look across our entire city and identify those properties that don't currently have any recognition or status, and make recommendations to recognize them either by listing on our heritage register or even identifying candidates for formal protection through designation.
Nice. Okay, wonderful. And my understanding too is that that list is a long one, right?
It is. So there's a few lists we have, and you can see a lot of this information on the challenge submission that I provided, and some links. We have some interactive story maps and mapping that you can take a look at to actually see what the different heritage statuses are, inventoried properties, registered properties, and designated, and where the existing listings are across the entire city. But in terms of sort of our main objective with our Built Heritage Inventory Strategy is using that existing inventory of properties that have no status currently, and resurveying them and screening them and seeing which ones have heritage value worth recognizing and protecting. And that list is about 7,000 long right now. And that's really just a drop in the bucket in terms of those other properties that we haven't even inventoried in the past. And then we also have quite a long list of properties that we've identified as being candidates for designation. So either through our proactive inventory work, the Built Heritage Strategy, or through our planning division's work plan, where they've had requests where people have actually said, I'd like to see this property designated, whether it's their own property, whether they're a member of the community, or even from council or a heritage committee. And that list is about 80 properties long. So it is daunting at times, but at least we've proactively identified those properties that we think are candidates for protection so that we can look at them in the future.
Right, and I guess that whole point is that you're getting ahead of things so that you're not in a situation where heritage is destroyed or changed without some planning and some community consultation. Is that the right idea?
Yeah, and I mean, there's different avenues. There's the fact that, you know, as a part of development applications, if we can let people know ahead of time transparently, so that if they're looking to buy a property and their goal is to treat it as though there's nothing on it and redevelop it, if they know that there's an interest in terms of the historic building that's on it, then maybe that will sort of guide which properties people buy and how people redevelop them. But there's also the goal of trying to protect, you know, individual properties that and manage change to them over time. So even just private homes and other types of buildings where we actually have financial incentives to assist people who do own designated properties to assist with restoration and conservation work as well.
Wonderful. And in a nutshell, just, you know, this is it's a lot of information for whenever you dive into someone's whole work portfolio with a question like that I asked you. Could you tell us what, in sort of in a nutshell, why is that work important to the city of Hamilton, to communities?
Yeah, so I mean, we're a large municipality. We're an amalgamated municipality of former region with individual townships and municipalities that were brought together in 2001. And even within each of the former communities, there's also really unique individual areas. So think about how many historic downtowns we have across the entire city. Historic Dundas, historic downtown Hamilton, Waterdown and Flamborough, Stony Creek, Ancaster, Glanbrook. And even within those, we have other historic settlement areas and neighborhoods that have unique identities. So it's not a homogeneous sort of sense of place across the city. And each of these individual unique places really make up our collective identity of what the city of Hamilton is. And so by being able to actually study them, recognize and identify what is of value, what makes those places special and unique, and what specific structures and buildings contribute to that value, we can ensure that we're at least recognizing it and managing change in a way that doesn't necessarily detract from what makes these places special, but hopefully enhances them and ensures that we're keeping them safe for future generations to enjoy as well.
Nice, great answer. I think it's an interesting role because it's tying in sort of the physical, the built landscape with the sort of cultural and the community-based assets that are less tangible, right? But it's also very much about buildings on lists, right? And trying to figure out how to best protect those things. So it's really interesting. Could you sort of tell us more about, you'd laid out sort of 3 particular challenges from your area. Would you like to start with whatever one sort of makes sense and just walk us through? Sure.
I'll just note in terms of the Built Heritage Inventory Strategy, the way in which we do that is we look at, we've been looking at geographic areas sort of in phases. So our first phase of our inventory work was in downtown Hamilton. So we looked at the entirety of the downtown, surveyed every property. So took photographs, filled out, we have a standard inventory form for doing that work. Conducted research, developed what we call a historic context statement that really understands how that area has evolved individually, and then evaluate each individual property in terms of what contribution it makes to that historic context or value. And that first pilot we did in 2014 was in downtown Hamilton. Our second phase was in the Durand neighborhood, just south of the downtown. And we're just wrapping up our most recent phase in historic Waterdown in Flamborough. So we're going to continue to do these phases geographically. And some of the challenges that I've submitted here are sort of related to assisting with that work. Specifically, we're looking at starting in downtown Dundas as soon as we're finished our Waterdown inventory right now. So hopefully early 2021. And so there'd be an opportunity to actually assist with the development of the historic context statement for downtown Dundas. There's obviously a lot of amazing existing resources that already exist, working with hopefully the Dundas Museum and Archives, who I started to make contact with already, but really looking to gather all of the primary and secondary historical research for the area, look at historical photographs that are available, other historic primary documents, and really synthesize and summarize what the value of downtown Dundas is and what its attributes are. So what specific tangible features relate to that value. So there'd be an opportunity hopefully to assist with conducting that, that research and developing that historic context statement.
Nice, that's great, and it's really neat to see from that too. On the challenge, we have a link to the watered down example, which is a draft form. Is that right?
It's draft right now. We're just wrapping up. There's been some additional feedback as a part of our final phase of this project, so there might be some minor tweaking, but that's pretty close to what the final historic context statement will look like.
Nice. So that's a great thing for folks who are interested to take a look at and see, and my read of it, there's a really wide sort of span of what that history looks like and the how the formation of the community, but also a little bit of the landscape and of pre-colonial contact and Indigenous settlement, which is really important to not sort of be lost in the focusing on Confederation era buildings or that sort of thing. Is there any sort of any thoughts around the inclusion of Indigenous presence in going forward for the Dundas version? That's
a really good point. Yeah, and with the watered down inventory and generally with our work, in terms of our primary goal with the inventory is identifying physical, tangible, above ground resources. So unfortunately, when it comes to Indigenous occupation and presence, we don't typically have any human-made physical features left above ground. There's obviously archaeology that's possible. That's not really within the scope of this type of work though. But we want to make sure that we're capturing and appropriately identifying, the importance of the land to Indigenous peoples and who occupied it before Euro-Canadian settlement and colonialism. And so we looked at, with the watered down example, the natural heritage and the topography of the area and how, although that lended itself to the Euro-Canadian settlement in terms of mill development and actually using the Grindstone Creek in that case, it was also a really important area for Indigenous peoples who lived in the area, who also traveled through the area. And a lot of actually the historic transportation corridors in that context were originally Indigenous trails and routes as one of the gentlest sort of routes up the escarpment across the Hamilton area. And so for Dundas, I think the outcome will probably be quite similar in terms of looking at one, information we already have, previous archaeological assessments that might have been done in the area, other historical research that's been conducted that looks at previous Indigenous presence and occupation, but potentially also reaching out to the First Nations and Indigenous communities that have traditional territory in that area and looking to get more constructive feedback and input into the development of sort of the summary of that history as well.
Wonderful. That's great to hear, and really interesting how that how those stories are told and included. And I think that's really important work. So glad to see that happening for sure. Great. So that's one of the challenges.
Yeah.
What about exactly.
I got two more.
Go on to the next one. Go ahead.
So the second one, which is also related to this next phase of our Dundas inventory that we're looking to start in 2021. Is the assistance with actually identifying the significance of really the prominent landmarks in Dundas. So as a part of the inventory strategy, we look to actually identify candidates for designation, like I said. So those significant buildings that are worthy of formal protection under the Heritage Act. And as a part of making recommendations for designation, we do comprehensive assessments, really understanding the history of a property, how it's evolved, what the important historical associations are with people, themes, milestones in the community, and also what the design or physical value of the property is. Was it associated with an important architect or builder? Did an important person live there? So really understanding the full breadth of the history of a property and being able to research and compile that history to assist us in hopefully designating those properties that we identify.
Nice, and that really flows in from that historical context statement too, but with more specificity, I'm assuming.
Exactly, yeah. Really understanding the broader context, I think, will help refine and also put things into perspective in terms of the research that's being done on an individual property.
Nice. Okay, and number three.
Number three is not necessarily related to our Dundas project, but related to our continued work. So as a part of each phase of our inventory strategy, when we're looking at a specific area, we engage and consult with the community. We usually start at the beginning of a project to let them know that we're starting the inventory, to get initial feedback on what their thoughts are on the important buildings, gathering places, what makes the community special to them. But at the crux of what we're doing is actually trying to protect and recognize buildings. And when we get to the end stage of each project, we generally have the same concerns and questions raised by owners that we're notifying to let them know that we're recommending they be added to the register or potentially be a candidate for designation. A lot of concerns are often raised around the impact of that recognition, either listing or designation, on property value, on resale value. We get sort of tangential questions also about concerns about insurance. There's really a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of ideas that the concept of heritage conservation and protection is to freeze something in time and prevent people from being able to change their homes or buildings and allow them to evolve safely and to meet the needs of people as our society evolves and what our requirements are for where we live. So although we've done as a city some preliminary research and engagement with the Hamilton Burlington Real Estate Association or Realtors Association to try to figure out where this misconception is coming from, because we're also hearing it directly from realtors who are telling clients, heritage, no, you don't want that. So we really want to get to the root of where that's coming from and actually try to do a statistical analysis within the Hamilton context to see if there is validity to that, although we have not yet been able to find any empirical evidence to that effect. There have been some studies regionally within sort of the greater Ontario area, but nothing that's actually proven that there's a negative correlation between heritage protection, whether it's listing and designation, and property value. So we would love to potentially have some local students be able to do that analysis, hopefully partner in terms of getting data from the Realtors Association, as well as providing information on our end in terms of where our designated properties are, the mapping, and some other information to be able to do that analysis.
Nice, that's really interesting, and such a we were sort of talking earlier about the business connections within all these different conversations around community and heritage, and that's a really, I think, good example of looking for some particular sort of statistical references to help better understand where people are coming from, and also to maybe fight some misinformation that's happening, and really in your case looking for that Hamilton specific data on those particular properties. So that's something that we're continuing to sort of work on too, around getting access to that data. But I think that's a really interesting piece that might be of interest to some folks that maybe you wouldn't normally work with, right? So yeah. I think that's always exciting. Yeah, very good. Wonderful, thank you. If you could sort of, you've given us 3 great challenges. And you talked a little bit in depth about them each individually, but if you could tell us a little bit more about some of the deliverables that you're looking for each of those particular pieces, and just sort of making it explicit, I guess. Some of those things were sort of touched on, but if you could just sort of walk us through what you're sort of proposing that you'd love to have back from students and faculty.
Sure. In terms of the one we just talked about, the statistical analysis, if it was really possible to have a final study prepared based on the data that came to some conclusion, or potentially that there isn't a correlation that exists, but looking for the result of analysis to say whether there's a demonstrated correlation between heritage status and property value within the Hamilton context. So depending on what people, what students sort of have an idea of in terms of the best way to do that. I know it would be quite difficult probably to actually sort of ensure that the study, there's a lot of different factors that could impact property value. So I think it could be challenging to do that analysis.
Right. Trying to narrow down some of those pieces. To isolate a little bit. Yeah.
So I think it might take some thought in terms of actually formulating how that analysis will be done, how things are sort of, factored in terms of how that's being done. But yes, essentially, hopefully a study that has a conclusion for that one. For the other 2 that are related to our inventory work and specifically to Dundas, For the historic context statement one, we would love essentially a draft historic context statement in a similar format to our most recent Waterdown example to come out of that. And you know, whether that's just based on, depending on what is available to the students during this time of COVID, if that's just research-based, if it could also potentially include a community engagement component, that would be fantastic. And the city would obviously assist with that because we do have our standard process for when we're doing our inventory phases and can feed sort of the student related work into that. And then for the other component related to the Dundas inventory, for the landmark buildings that we're looking to potentially designate, we would be looking for what we refer to cultural heritage assessment reports. And we do have a set of guidelines for preparing those types of reports, both specific to the city as well as what the provincial requirements are for preparing designations. So we would be looking for hopefully drafts that meet the intent of those guidelines.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's really helpful. And I know it will be helpful for instructors sort of listening in as well. And just as a note for instructors, you know, we try to really get some focused ideas from our staff members around what they're particularly looking for that will help them to add value to the work that they're doing. But it's not necessarily a delivery system that we're, you know, asking your students to produce. So it's all part of a negotiation and a conversation, and you're welcome to sort of come back and describe different ways that might meet both Alyssa's needs and your teaching and learning objectives as well. So this is the start of the conversation for sure. Wonderful. So is there anything else you'd like to add, Alissa, before we wrap up?
Just this is really, you know, the tip of the iceberg. I think, especially recognizing that this inventory strategy should be going on for quite some time, because we do want to do the entire city. Right. So there's continued phases of this work that can be done. And I think there's also different tangential related projects that, as this progresses, or as maybe suits the needs of certain faculty members and their classes, could be done. Some initial conversations around potentially developing Hamilton-specific architectural guides that can assist not only staff with doing their work, but also potentially better empowering community groups to do their own inventory work before we as a city can get there. Other type of sort of inventory frameworks and guides that could be developed that I think the better we can empower those community groups to do that work, the easier our job will be, and also in terms of community buy-in. So if say, you know, different neighborhood associations want to try doing their own inventory, if we can provide them with the materials to be able to assist them to do that and guide them in that work to be consistent with our city framework, that would be fantastic as well. Yeah, and there's that buy-in, and it's not sort of it's less of a centralized process than if we can sort of empower different communities. And I'm, you know, this is music to my ears because I'm hearing all these different sort of ideas for future CityLAB projects, and that's always wonderful. So thank you so much for describing those challenges to us, and I think they're just really some really rich things that will be of interest to lots of different folks. So we'll continue to work with our faculty partners to find some good matches for you. And thanks for joining us today. For those of you who are listening in, that's the end of our online matchmaker for today. You can, as I mentioned at the beginning, you can see all of the different challenges that we have on our website, citylabhamilton.com/challenges, and you can apply, tell us you're interested in working on a challenge on the website. And if you're also interested, you can submit your own idea for a challenge by November 16th. Thanks very much, and we'll see you again